You're very welcome back to Counterpoint after our short summer break, and starting off with a great interview with Doug Beattie, who's described as the Irish correspondent for GB News. For those of us that don't know this, GB News is absolutely hot in Britain. It's the largest news channel now in the British market after only 4 years. So I'm here to talk to Doug about all things to do with GB News and what's going on in the media market in Britain. And of course, he is the Irish correspondent, so he's intimately familiar with Northern Ireland and the South and everything in between. He's a veteran journalist after 30 years, a remarkable career, and I expect an author as well at some stage in the future, without giving the game away. We've been just getting to know each other, and it's been already fascinating. But what I wanted to ask you about was this: when I was preparing for this, Doug, right, I looked at what are the top 10, geopolitical, social issues in Britain and compared them to Ireland. Leave us, or the Republic of Ireland, by the way. And then, while I'm doing that, literally as I'm doing that, item number 4, which was asylum and immigration, has just raced to the top of the UK agenda. And of course, we don't have the same degree of analysis on stuff down here. What's going on, and why is that happening?
Well, it's not surprising that Ireland as a whole and GB are actually quite close. Socially, economically, they have always been. There is that flow between the British Isles that's always been there, no matter about politics of the past. They are very similar in their way of life and how they look at family units, etc. What we've seen is an explosion of immigration coming into the UK and illegal immigration, which is putting real pressure on the economy in Great Britain. But it's also putting pressure on those areas such as housing, healthcare, schools, because naturally when more people come in, the infrastructure has to expand with it. And of course it hasn't. And if you look at Ireland now, exactly what's happening there, we have seen a massive influx of immigration into Ireland, and people don't want to talk about it openly. I mean, they're afraid of the R word being banded about, of being a racist, but really what they are is realists. And I have seen in the last 2 years in the Republic of Ireland a massive push towards trying to control this immigration, but not from government, but from local people who have some real concerns. And they're no different from the rest of the UK. In fact, they're no different from the rest of Europe, because it's okay bringing people into your country. The problem being, of course, is who pays for it. And that is really where Europe is up against it at this minute in time. We've seen what's happening in Germany. We've seen what's happening in France. We've seen what's happened in Holland. And there is instability there. We've seen what's happened in Italy and Greece. And there is now this breaks going on inside the whole of Europe. So Ireland is no different than that. Very similar ways of life. And the family unit is very, very important in Ireland, as it is right across the UK. So that now comes under stress because of likes of school places, etc. Grandmothers being able to live in the same place, the same area as their daughters and their sons. Price of housing's going up, and that also feeds into that fear.
Yeah, that's one of the remarkable things. I know that the UK economy has been flatlined for a long time now, probably 15 years or longer. And, I would say to the Irish audience, could imagine Ireland, if we didn't have the growth we're having, okay, it's driven by an awful lot of American investment coming in. But if we didn't have that and we had a stagnant economic outlook, things would be really roasting hot here. A lot of people are saying, well, there's money coming in, and I'm not that concerned at the moment. But when you look at it, like last year on the 25th of June, 2024, we voluntarily joined the EU Migration Pact, which was completely contrary to the vote of the Irish people under Lisbon II, the Treaty of Lisbon II, which was in, I think, 2009. And the Irish government, instead of going to the people and say we need a fresh referendum, just decided to make the vote themselves. And not one TD of any of the government parties stood up and said there's something wrong here, because all the independent TDs voted against it because the constituents were obviously deeply concerned. The only other country in Europe that had an opt-out was Denmark. And the Danes seem to have got a grip on it. I'll be covering that in a separate programme. But I'm looking across at Britain, or at Britain as an island, and saying, at least you've got control, at least technically you've got control of your borders, and you don't have actual control of your borders, but we don't have actual control of our borders, and we've actually handed over legal control of our borders to faceless bureaucrats in Brussels. And it's an extraordinary situation because, as we were saying just before the programme, the island of Ireland could become a dumping ground for...
Yeah, I predicted this 24 months ago, that when the backstop was in place during the framework negotiations, of which Leo Varadkar was in Brussels at that time, I witnessed those negotiations going on. I could never prove it, but it was quite obvious that Ireland had gave up something in order to make sure that British goods or American goods coming into Ireland, that they wouldn't flood the market. So therefore, Northern Ireland, the price of Brexit was Northern Ireland had to stay inside the EU common market. And there had to be something given by Ireland for that. And we looked at it at that time, and I studied how much Northern Ireland's economy would be affected by this, that there wouldn't be any new jobs in manufacturing, etc., coming because of the framework document.
Can you just explain that point? That's a very interesting point.
Well, the framework document puts various taxes and open market clauses in place. It also stops state aid coming from anywhere outside the EU. So it's capped coming into Northern Ireland. So if I was an American businessman and I was wanting to set up inside Northern Ireland, and American businessmen are very shrewd with their bonds, they want returns on them very, very fast. So what do they need for that? They need a cheap, educated workforce. They need instant access to the raw materials and instant access to open markets. In other words, they need to get their product out without any things in the road of that. The framework document caps the state aid. There is no access to raw materials, and there is an even harder way to your open markets. So from that, I concluded, well, there will be no investment here in manufacturing, and there hasn't been. The only jobs that have came out of the framework document are actually the civil servants' jobs that are in the ports and millions of pounds worth
the bureaucracy.
Of bureaucracy. And the taxpayer is paying for that. And when I looked at it and said, something wrong there, that cannot be right.
Now, you're old school veteran journalist. We've just been speaking for a while before we went on camera. And, with an abundant curiosity. That's one of the two words I wrote down when I was just talking to you. You're abundantly curious. I mean, that's what's driving you to do the style of old school shoe leather journalism that you do. Well, so can I ask you, when you go down into Northern Ireland and you go down into the communities and the shops and the businesses and you talk to people, what are they saying to you about the number one item now in the United Kingdom, which is asylum seekers and refugees?
Well, there's a real worry now in Northern Ireland because we've seen it here during the Rwanda plan when Rishi Sunak decided that they were going to send people to Rwanda to be cleared. During that period of time, the Taoiseach here actually wrote to Rishi Sunak saying stop, because the people that were in the UK, the immigrants that were in the UK, emptied across an open border and used the freedom of travel area to come into the Republic of Ireland. And that was the point, when there was a real spike in the amount of immigrants that came into the Republic of Ireland and really did affect the every day-to-day running of Ireland at that stage. We've seen tented villages in Dublin. We've seen them being forced into areas like Newtown, Mount Kennedy, etc., at the expense of the people that were there. And Ireland was having to deal with that. Well, at the same time, in Northern Ireland, we had seen the use of hotels being dropped, and they were starting to put these immigrants out into the community. And companies were formed that were an arm's length body companies, and they started to put offer landlords twice as much for ordinary rent, which meant locals couldn't rent those areas because the landlord was getting twice as much money and his house renovated after 5 years. You would be a fool if your landlord to say no to it. And most of these houses that were cheap houses were in deprived areas.
Mm.
And what you got then was a change of culture in that area. Because no matter what you think of immigrants, all immigrants are not bad people. I mean, the people that I'm talking to in England and so forth at these protests, the ones that are the most anger in them are actually second generation immigrants that are saying, sorry, my parents and my grandparents came here, had to sit all the exams, they had to prove that they could contribute to British society. And, many of these children that were there didn't even get a school place for 2 years because the parents weren't sure were they going to stay or not. And they're standing there watching people coming in, going into 4 and 5 star hotels, getting mobile phones, free leisure centre access, etc. And they're saying, hold on, my parents, my grandparents, that didn't happen to us. Why is it now that these other people are able to come in and do that? And ironically, these people, these second generation and third generation immigrants have contributed to society. They have paid tax. They are brilliant members of society, and they fitted in so well because they were taught that it was a blessing to be in this country away from where you were actually running from conflict. And the difference with an economic migrant is they're coming to get all the same benefits and cannot contribute to that society. And the fear in Northern Ireland, in most working class areas, we've seen it boil over in Ballymena.
Yeah, how did that manifest itself?
Well, that was Romas that had been put into these housing trusts that were run by those at arm's length bodies. The landlords in those areas were getting twice as much rent for them. So, of course, they took them. Problem was that there became so many of them that they started bringing their way of life with them. And, in some of these countries, gay people aren't respected. Women are definitely not respected. And during the weekend, there was numbers of things going on in amongst the town of Ballymena.
Oh, right. Okay.
And women were coming out of bars and they were being followed down the street and people saying, you come with me and so forth. So the women stopped going out. And then the bars started losing money because if there's no women in the bars, to be frank about it and honest, young lads aren't going to the bar, and that's exactly what started happening. Then a couple of rapes took place in the month before. We don't know who did those. And then an alleged sexual assault took place in that particular street. That was the point that broke. And how do I know that? Because I got my pen and paper out, and when I went there to report, I walked down the street, I talked to the locals, I talked to the bar owners, I talked to the shop owners, talked to local councillors, found out what was happening. Talked to the people that were living in and around those areas. And it was basically enough, no more. We can't take any more, and it boiled over. And the arrests that were made, there were allegations of a sexual assault and still remain to be that. But the local people had enough. And it came to basically civil unrest in the town.
But there was a confrontation.
Absolutely, there was a confrontation.
What year are we talking about now, for listeners?
Oh, you're only going back a couple of months here.
Okay.
You're going back to May, June.
Okay.
And what surprised me the most about it was people were calling it sectarianism and they were calling it racism. It wasn't. For when I was standing watching young lads coming in to throw petrol bombs and bricks at the police lines, there was quite obviously both sides of the community, which was amazing to me in Northern Ireland. We had nationalist Republicans coming in alongside loyalists to put this community to try and get some sort of basis back in it again. I stood there after being in the media for over 30 years. I stood and watched this and thought, the two communities have came together.
Common
ground that they came together on. And it was frightening, actually, to watch it happen. And there was real venom. But then the councils decided to move these particular Romas to Larne Leisure Centre. It was found out, and they burned down Larne Leisure Centre. Then they put them in a bus, and they put them to Portadown. That was also found out, and they were put out of Portadown. the hard side of that was local government listening to what was going on to get both sides of a community that has historical problems in it to come together in such a way? That had been boiling for a long time.
Mm.
And it cost the taxpayer £1 million per night for the policing at that particular point. And that is, frightening for a taxpayer to realise that a government decision that was made through NGOs and not arm's length body actually cost us that on our pocket. And reporting that, I was the only journalist reporting it that way because I decided to use shoe leather and go that direction and find out what was actually behind this. And unfortunately, that is brewing still. But you can now see much more of it coming out here in Ireland, in parts of Scotland and England at this moment in time. You can see locals really coming together. And we're not talking right-wing thugs. We're talking about mothers, grandmothers.
Had enough.
They've had enough. They've just said, we can't do this thing.
And we can see all the flags going up as well, which is becoming an interesting issue. Even this week in Ireland, it's become an issue because Dublin City Council, where parts of it have suggested that that you should not be putting up your national flag because it's racist. And of course, or it's right wing, or sorry, it's hard right, but I think a lot of those tropes are falling away because of the scale of what's coming up from the surface. But one of the things that I'm fascinated about is that we're under pressure from Europe in the Republic to upgrade our hate crime to hate speech, which is basically just civil service language for anti-free speech. That you cannot say anything that's counter the government narrative, but they call it hate. They call it hate speech, but in Britain or in the UK, it seems to be quite a problem that you can get into serious trouble if you say the wrong thing.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why we have to be very careful about what we're saying.
Yeah,
the channel has to be factual. No matter what we put forward, you're always asked, can you make that stand up? Show me the facts of it. And it is about facts. It's about putting forward another side of the argument. I'm not saying that the mainstream media aren't factual. Of course they are, but it's what facts they choose to put down and what facts they choose to use. And it was always said to me years ago by an old journalist friend of mine, there's three sides to every story. There's one side, the other, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. And it's up to us not to take one side or the other. It is up to us to tell the story. And hate crime is a very serious charge, but it is now starting to appear on a world stage.
Well, we're going towards hate speech. Well, just for, again, it's all grown for a lot of the audience, but we had a bill which wasn't passed, which is sitting there on the back burner, which basically says that on the basis of a suspicion or a report to the Gardaí, that and with the rubber stamp of a judge, your home can be raided, all of your electronic equipment can be taken, and if there is any suggestion that anything you've stored on it could be deemed to be offensive to a list of named minorities, that you will be prosecuted under hate speech. Now, we didn't enact that, but that's what we're being asked to do by the EU. But that's what is actually happening in the United Kingdom, is it not?
It is to a certain extent, but really there has been pushback on that. The legislation that is currently passed was meant to protect children, etc. But anyone that is openly, prowling on children or the weak or elderly, well, deserves to be arrested. Let's be frank about it. But for an opinion online, as long as it is not a threatening opinion, you will have a hard job proving that in a court. And to see someone jailed in that would be even worse. And we have seen We have seen that play out in Britain at this minute in time. A very high-profile case that's actually been brought up by the American government. And that brings us to Vance, who stood in, I think it was Munich, and said, we are on the same page as you, as long as you have the same Bill of Rights as us.
Well, he told him that was the biggest problem Europe faced.
Yes. Yeah. And that Bill of Rights goes back to 1690 to King William. And America has, for 250 years, stood by those exact Bill of Rights. If you look at Winston Churchill's biography, it actually states it in it. Freedoms of speech, religious freedoms, right to bear arms, right to know God by yourself. All those are in that. And that's really Vance and Trump has gone back to. If you have an argument, and there's no harm in a public argument or a public discussion, and you've got to say in 250 years, most powerful nation on earth. Why is that? Is it because they followed the free speech line? There's a number of reasons for it. But to arrest someone for an unthreatening tweet is going too far.
Yeah, but they were trying to make an example. But we're in a very interesting situation where we are now the headquarters of the Media Commission for the EU. We're also the headquarters in the EU for American technology companies with their platforms. And the American administration has made it quite clear that they are not happy at all with the approach towards clamping down on free speech in the European Union, no matter which way you want to call it. I mean, this hate speech thing is just a badge of convenience to cover what's really going on, which is you're not allowed to say anything that's counter a government narrative. That's what it's about. The Americans know that. The Europeans know that. There's a game being played around it at the moment, but it's getting very serious because the Americans are saying that any senior civil servants or any individuals that get involved in applying this principle of law that damages an American company or an American citizen will be sanctioned. That's what they're saying. They haven't done it yet, but that's what they're saying they're prepared to do.
Ireland is caught in a very tricky situation with America. The tariffs that have come in are going to play badly at this point, unfortunately for Ireland. And if Ireland started playing those games with America, knowing how this Trump administration operates, they could be on very, very stodgy ground. And Ireland has always played right. They've managed to stay on the fence between America and Europe quite well in the past. And I think they will probably manage to walk that line. But it's how many times they slip off it in the next 4 to 8 years will be the problem for Ireland.
But isn't that interesting? Because if you look at, you mentioned it earlier on, if you look at the shift in Europe, the window is moving because the people are moving. The politicians are following the herd. The herd is the people. The people are saying we've had enough of this, but you just haven't acted on it properly yet as far as the people are concerned. But what I find absolutely fascinating, I didn't realise how much media power, because I was just looking out, I did a study on British media today in preparing for this conversation with you, and I was gobsmacked at the scale and speed at which GB News has moved. And what has moved it clearly is the people. The British people are responding to the content that you're producing and the quality that's being produced versus BBC One, ITV, Channel 4, The Guardian, The Independent, The Sun, Mail Online, and yet GB News is grabbing, and it seems to have plugged into something. And I know there's left and right on I get all that on the channel, but it has picked something up which now seems to be manifesting itself in the flags going up and also in a change in the zeitgeist in the United Kingdom.
Well,
is that an exaggeration?
No, it is expanding rapidly. Its viewership has really, really picked up. Pardon me, but it's more... I've got to take it back to Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton had control of the media because he had a media team around him that worked along the lines, well, if you want an interview with Bill, you're going to have to do this. And you run the smaller story and we'll get you the bigger interview. When the 1998 Good Friday Agreement came, you had Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, who watched this, and they did the same. And we have seen...
This is this whole media management apparatus.
Absolutely. And what you end up getting is other political parties now do the same thing. If you want an interview with the Taoiseach or, Taoiseach, you will do this, and we'll give you this story, and then, you know what, you can run this smaller one for us. And they also send out press releases. Anybody ever sends me a press release, I go, well, what do you not want me to look at?
Yeah.
Why are you sending me a press release telling me
where's the dark space?
A great guy you are?
You probably look up into a starry sky and you're wondering what's going on between the stars.
Absolutely. And I watched this happen during the Good Friday Agreement, and Irish politics, how they dealt with the media, changed right there and then, because they watched the Americans and they thought we'll do the same. And I mean, I have an agriculture minister in Northern Ireland that refuses to speak to me without 5 questions 2 weeks in advance. That's not an interview.
No, it's not. No.
During the framework negotiations, Simon Coveney was in Hillsborough Castle. The Northern Ireland office denied me access to it and said there was no room in the castle. No room in a castle for a man with a camera. And when I walked in, there was all the mainstream media. I eventually got in, arguing my case, but they wouldn't give me a question. So what was the sense of me being there? Because all the questions had already been set.
So it's theatre.
It's theatre for people. And you do get good journalists in amongst them, but they tend to be older journalists, and they tend to have a real idea of what goes on. But when you look, our job is to tell a story and keep the facts. Part of our job is to look at this and go, if you do this, this will happen. And this may happen. And if that might happen, that could happen. So what you're doing is looking into the future if you make a decision. But from any politics, you can tell immediately, if you do that, this will be a consequence of it. And there doesn't seem to be the same insight into that to follow a story from start to finish. Now, I started as a journalist. I went in as an editor and then as a camera person. I have worked in all parts, including engineering, of the media, and I have seen it change dramatically. And it's because there is no follow-up on the story. And then you're constantly fighting fires when you're looking at what happened next. So newsrooms are running from, oh my goodness, how did that happen? Whereas an older journalist will look at it and say, keep your powder dry on the first one, because within a matter of weeks or months, the second one's going to happen. And then you can refer to the first one. And that is now absent from media because we are driven by news every day on a phone.
But are we manufacturing, this is a question for the Irish Republic as well as the United Kingdom, are we manufacturing a new crop of journalists that are absent the training and education in the journalistic, we've DCU in here. Are they not being given the critical thinking skills to do that?
Critical thinking. What a marvellous way of putting things. I have watched most young journalists come out now, and there is some good ones amongst them. They've got to be said, it's not an old boy complaining about everybody else. But what happens now with education is they go from primary school to secondary school to further education, which is university usually. They're taught by the same teachers. They are taught almost an ethos rather than work and a workflow. So, I mean, I'd said to you just before we came on camera, I had a young girl with me and I said to her, about budgets for a country.
You mean a student?
A student, a student that came out on work experience with me. And it was over the Hillsborough talks, and there was so many million offered. But the Northern Ireland Assembly owed backdated pay that would have sucked that up. She says, they should take it. And I said, why would you? And I put it to her, if I had £1 million in the bank and I went down the road and there was a house for £1 million for sale, would I buy it? And she said, oh yes. And I said, what about the heating of it? What about feeding myself? What about the running of the house? And then I asked her, did you not study economics? And she said, no, I study politics. I said, did you study history? And she said, no. And I thought, how can you be looking at politics or journalism if you're not studying economics and history in the same part.
Mm.
You're being taught an ethos. And that is where the problems really begin. Because what you're doing is ticking boxes to get past an exam.
Well, can I ask you too, Mark, right? Does the UK government pay money to the main British media organisations? Does it give them money?
The British government funds the BBC.
Aside from the BBC,
as same as the RTE.
Yeah. No, aside from the BBC and RTE, let's just park them aside as state broadcast.
Commercial television in Britain is commercial television.
It doesn't get a bean.
What has started to happen is they were going to do away with the licence fee, and that has now been sent across to like pool feeds, etc. So it cuts down on resources, but no, there is no funding to commercial television.
If you were comparing funding in the Republic of Ireland to Britain by population size, how much would you multiply it by? I mean, if I gave you a number, but let me give you the number, right? So the Irish government, the government of the Republic of Ireland, contributes 7.5 million in grants through various schemes to the non-RTE part of the Irish media, print media, radio. There's not much not much television, so it comes out in the form Commission na Man, the crowd I was telling you about earlier on that are at the centre of all of this. They gave 5.7 million to 103 organisations. Now I'd multiply that by 20 myself to bring it to UK standards, just on the basis scale, and when you then allow for, people wouldn't know this, but Global Ireland Media Challenge Fund. The Global Ireland Media Challenge Fund forks out 1.8 million, multiply that by 20 to bring it to UK standards, which is spread across RTE, Virgin Media and the journal.ie. And that's issued by the Department of Foreign Affairs for covering international affairs. So the Irish government is now directly funding commercial media in Ireland, which is why I call it the North Korea of Europe when it comes to media. And that's why, in my opinion, we live in a state of manufactured ignorance. Agnogenesis, as it's called.
Well, I think we live in a state of ignorance to a certain extent because the media allow the media to be censored.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Okay.
If you go back,
walk me through that. Yeah.
If you go back to the point of me not being allowed into talks, if you go back to the point of ministers not wanting to speak to me, if that was, and I mean, I could actually quote one that a journalist from Belfast Live was not allowed into the Secretary of State's press conference. And all the media outside, BBC, RT, UTV, said, well, we're all not going in until he gets in. Because he's of a similar thinking mind. But when I was locked outside Hillsborough, no problem. When press conferences are called in Stormont, if they see me standing at the press conference, many occasions, the politicians will go to the mainstream media and say, can we do a one-on-one over here? One-on-one, because he's going to ask us an awkward question that we might have to answer. At that stage, that is actually censorship of the media by the media. And you end up, again, looking at what happened in America, because what happens in America usually filters down. You end up with two different medias. And that's pretty much what we are starting to see right across Europe.
Well, we're beginning to get a sense of that here with gripped media, and it's almost comic to watch it when the gripped media correspondent is throwing a question to a government minister because they're now allowed to do so. You can see the physical reaction is one of, I don't really want to be here to listen to your question. You know, I mean, you can see it. You know, it's very interesting. As opposed to the kind of, and I've been in RT long enough to see it, the kind of pissing contest that goes on between the, kind of artificial debate between one politician and another. But really, it's almost like rehearsed theatre, as opposed to real strident engagement, robust debate, proper clarity of thinking, and a kind of an outcome for the audience on what's the truth here. As you said, is it left or is it right? Or, where is it in the middle? But it seems to me that the reason why you're pushing to the top so quickly, after only 4 years is quite extraordinary is because the people are responding to what you're doing. They're pushing you to the top because you're actually confronting the issues they want confronted in the style they want those issues confronted with. That seems to me to be what's happening. And that's a message for over here too.
That's just straight talking.
Yeah.
It is absolutely straight talking. No going round corners to talk our way back to where we were again. It's who, where, what, when, why. Quite simple, basic journalism. Ask the question, make sure your facts can stand up, and if you get a response, you get a response. So what I have had to find myself doing now is going round about ways of getting to those people, which doubles my workload. So if they won't talk to me, I go to the people. And that seems to be working quite well for GB News.
Yeah.
Because if politicians don't want to answer the questions, we have given them the right to reply. If they choose not to take it, well, then it's unfortunate for them if they're not included. But at all times, we will always look for the right to reply because it is good practice to do just that.
Well, it's old school stuff too. It's old school journalism. And when do you then see, now that GB News has grown this power, and well, I think the people actually have grown the power, right? I think it's all on them. Largely, they're responding to it. So that builds its own momentum. Is there any sign from the BBC, from ITV, and from the others? Are they beginning to even realise that we're like a lot of the existing politicians in Ireland, we're way out on the wrong limb here? The people are going in a different direction to us. There's the evidence. Look at what's happening here. And are they beginning to tiptoe back from their positions?
Oh, I have seen many journalists out of what you would call mainstream media trying to tiptoe back to where they're going. I receive phone calls all the time, people asking me, have I any contacts here or there? I have no problems with that. 30 years in the media, I've worked with many journalists, have many friends amongst them, and respect a lot of them. But the problem is, when they tiptoe back, it's what they get greeted with when they go back to talk to these people. The people don't trust them. And when there's no trust in journalism, there's no story.
But what about the editors then of BBC and ITV and so on? Do they not get it that the public are going in a different direction to where we've pitched the tent?
I think they probably are now. But again, it's how do you get back and get the trust of those people that you have basically ignored or decided to not report on for so long? That's the problem that mainstream media are now facing. We are seeing in Britain ECHR being talked about trying to come out of certain parts of the ECHR. And I am watching the media.
That's the European Commission for Human Rights.
Yeah, and I am watching the media, especially in Northern Ireland, saying, well, this will be a breach of the Good Friday Agreement. Well, it's not. The Good Friday Agreement's already been breached numerous times, especially with the border going in the Irish Sea. That is a blatant breach of the Good Friday Agreement. But what's real fear here is, if Britain comes out of the ECHR, and let's take this from a journalistic point of view, let's go the one step ahead. Let's look at history. We've seen what happened with Rwanda. What will happen with Northern Ireland if they're out of the ECHR and can deport? What will happen all those immigrants in London and so forth? Well, we know from Rwanda where they're coming to. They're coming here, to the Republic of Ireland, if that happens. And if Britain leaves the ECHR and Northern Ireland doesn't leave the ECHR, you go back to what I was reporting on 24 months ago, and you will see Ireland become the dumping ground for Europe's immigrants. Because there is only about 9 million people on this island, north and south. And it's a pretty big island for 9 million people. And you will see European money coming in to build other infrastructure, etc. And it will be filled with immigrants. And immigrants are not always bad. Some bring a lot to society. But if it's economic immigrants, and people say to me, well, you're Irish, do you? You know, the Irish went all over the world. Well, they did. They helped build London and Birmingham after the Second World War. There's no doubt about it. Difference was they worked. They paid their taxes. They very often ended up sleeping on sofas of relatives that lived there, that were paying rent or paying a mortgage. There was no pressure on the state. The Irish were getting paid for a job and contributing to society in not only rebuilding our country, but also in paying tax to that country, and it's so growing the economy.
But it's an extraordinary situation, because we're now faced with the possibility that that if somebody is not granted an immediate house and getting all the benefits, that you actually have to compensate them from state funds. So this is it's a two-tier citizenship in reverse. It's inverted, which is remarkable. Just taking that point about taking it one step further, when you now see the change, in this huge change in the UK political landscape, huge, and you're looking forward, and you see the point that you made about coming out of the European court system. So we're now in complete control of what we're going to do. How do you see it playing out? How do you see it playing out beyond that, over the next 10 years or so? I mean, if that's not too much, if that's not an unfair question to ask you. I mean, you're very familiar with all of the politics and movements around Britain and Ireland over the last number of years. But which way do you see it working out?
Well, if Britain does come into the ECHR, pretty much right away the boats will stop, and Britain will have control of its borders once again. How will that? You cannot have mass deportations in Britain. Those that are awaiting asylum, of course you can. But those that have set family roots down, etc., not only would it be hard, I don't think the British economy would like to do that either, even out of the most hardened parties there, because they are taxpayers, contributors to society. It's going to be a rough time for Britain. But unfortunately, without sort of repeating myself on it, it will be Ireland that will pay the cost for it. Because yous will be giving the benefits that Britain no longer give.
Well, we'll be relying on, because we joined the EU Migration Pact, we'll be relying on a pan-European response to its huge border and exposure to what's coming in, especially from North Africa and the Middle East, as economic migrants, but presenting as asylum seekers and refugees. It's going to be a fascinating. Whatever about the fears and trepidations about the whole thing, it's going to be a fascinating time, because the Irish political landscape, as it stands at the moment, is incapable of dealing with the issues we've been talking about in its current form. It's just not capable. The leadership isn't there, and the politicians aren't there.
But it is strange, because what I have watched over the last 2 to 3 years in Ireland is people who you would never have thought of coming onto the streets, being on the streets, mothers, grandmothers. I mean, I've watched them push prams and protests, and these are not people from what we would call working class areas. These are real people that contribute to Irish society, the real workhorses of Irish society, starting to come to these protests. And over the last 12 months, I think the Irish election last year was a real wake-up for the shredding of the anti-migration vote. I travelled right out around Ireland, and I looked at the people that were standing at that time, some very capable people, but there's too many people. And they basically shredded their own vote. The Unionists do it in the North all the time. Unionists have multiple Unionist parties. Sinn Féin is basically the only big Republican party. That you do have the SDLP, but it's a very small party. And I'm watching in that year these fragmented people starting to talk to one another. They're starting to come together. And as an observer in that, you always think to yourself, if they get themselves together, they get even some sort of voting pact in place, Irish politics the next time round will be very different. Because, as it's been shown by reform, you don't need to have vast numbers in a parliament to create waves, to stop things happening that you don't like. And that will be the part that will be the real tale that will be told in Irish politics through the next elections here. Whether they stand by themselves and get nothing, or whether they decide to come to some sort of compromise. Should that be one party, or should it be various lots of little parties with electoral pacts? That will be the part to watch.
Well, that's going to, I think we leave it at that. I mean, I think that's a very interesting point to end on about the capacity of those out there in an atomised area to come together in some form of cohesive force, as opposed to, coming into a meeting and deciding how we're going to have a split. But I think that what's going on in the United Kingdom next door is it gives an awful lot of momentum to what you've just said. So I want to thank you for coming on Counterpoint, Doug. It's been a fascinating discussion. I could talk to you all night about media, what's going on, and all of the war stories and inverted commas that you've got. I mean, you've been well scarred from it. I don't mean physically scarred, but it creates I mean, I used to love them years ago myself. It creates a great old school journalist, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.